Tom.
Could just add a small point. I mean, Nick Robinson sort of implies that the Treasury and Inland Revenue sort of willfully disregarded these problems. What happened was that in Gordon Brown's last big efficiency drive, large numbers of Inland Revenue staff were sacked, including specialist people who could have dealt with these problems. It was a classic example of, you know, being penny wise and pound foolish.
Tom.
But Nick, you've been very rude about your political opponents. The Treasury has, year after year, said it's going to crack down on this kind of tax avoidance. You know as well as I do, it's a constantly moving target. Are you really going to say that you can achieve this? A lot of people are going to say it's just fantasy economics. And can I just ask one other question? Could I just ask each of you to confirm, preferably with a yes or no answer, whether you're happy to see cuts in the budgets of your own local hospitals?
On the first, I just refuse to accept that a 10% reduction in this huge industry of tax avoidance and evasion is somehow an unrealisable target. As I say, there are some flagrant abuses of the tax system which may be presently legal. The evasion of stamp duty by very large companies is just one notorious example. But it can be changed if there's the political will there. I think we've done our homework. I've given you some very clear examples of how we think we could recoup just 10%. Frankly, if anything, I thought you would say, isn't that too modest? When you're losing over £40 billion to tax avoidance and evasion, we're, I think, starting with a very first, sort of modest first step, and I think we can achieve it. We don't think there is any need for cuts in maternity wards, A&E departments, GP services, the frontline health services that we all depend on, if, but only if, you're prepared to save a lot of money in those parts of the NHS where presently a great deal of money is being wasted. It's quite simply a question of priorities. At the moment, we've got a top-heavy NHS. We've got chief executives of primary care trusts who are being paid more than the Prime Minister. We think that's wrong. We've got a whole layer of bureaucracy, strategic health authorities, which we would scrap altogether. You've had, what, 5,000 new managers employed over the last year, but barely more than 2% of nurses. And so you've got this explosion in administrative costs in the NHS, and yet the maternity ward where my third son was born in southwest London just last year is threatened with closure. We think you can protect the NHS that we rely on. That's why we haven't got into this farcical debate about ring fencing. If you don't protect the parts where money is presently going wasted. Adam.
You've made much of plain speaking this morning. We can all look at the opinion polls and the trends there. Do you therefore accept the contention of your two opponents, Gordon Brown and David Cameron, that is the choice before the British people as far as who credibly is going to become Prime Minister, that effectively you're not really a credible Prime Ministerial candidate? And in the event of the polls being reflected in the outcome of the election, is it credible that the Liberal Democrats, in spite of your own inclinations, could ever condone in the formation of a Conservative minority or coalition government?
I'm not going to apologise for the fact that we're aiming high. That, of course, I want to be Prime Minister. We've had 6 million people vote for the Liberal Democrats at the last election. That's almost 1 in 4 people who voted. We're campaigning in this election, by golly do I know it, given the amount of time I'm crisscrossing the country, on a bigger scale geographically than any other party. We're now the only party which is strong in the south and the southwest, where Labour has in effect disappeared, and we're the only party which is winning and winning big in, say, the big cities of the north, including my own of Sheffield, where the Conservatives have disappeared. So, you know, we're campaigning across the country in a way that we've never done before. We're targeting more seats than we've ever done before. We've got this huge mandate of almost 1 in 4 people who voted at the last general election. I know people will constantly encourage me to limit our ambitions, but I think this election campaign has kind of barely started. I think there are lots and lots of people who haven't really focused yet on the choices before them. So to sort of short-circuit that process before it's even really kicked off, I'm not going to do that at all. And your second question, I think, was...
Well, whether in fact the Liberal Democrats, a lot of people say you might be open to this, but whether your party would ever really be open in a balanced parliament situation to somehow paving the way for David Cameron to become Prime Minister.
I think if there's a balanced parliament, it's not a question of us or indeed anybody else paving the way for someone to just have their way. By definition, you'd then be in new territory where politicians would need to talk to each other. And I think, you know, to be clear about, to give people a kind of sense of what you would do if politicians need to speak to each other, you've got to be clear about your priorities. And we've been very, very clear. We've got a whole manifesto for government here, but we've been very clear, as you can see on the front cover, that of those policies, there are 4 big priorities: tax reform, smaller class sizes, the pupil premium, splitting up the banks, a new approach to the economy, and cleaning up the rotten state of British politics. So, you know, I don't think anyone can reasonably ask anyone or me to predict the future. You are entitled to say, well, what are the things that you'll always fight for in whatever circumstances? That's what they are. And I would say one other thing. I so happen to think that regardless of the outcome of the general election, whether there is a balanced parliament or not, whether we're in government or in opposition, that regardless of the outcome, there is a case now, a very strong case, for politicians of different parties to talk to each other on this one central issue of coming clean with the British people about the scale of the structural deficit and how long it'll take to deal with it. And that's why we've proposed what we call a Council for Financial Stability, you can call it what you like, where the Chancellor and the Shadow Chancellors would sit down with the Governor of the Bank of England and the head of the Financial Services Authority, and for once just come clean with people and say, look, this is this big black hole in the public finances. Together we think this is basically how big it is, because there's still dispute about that, and this is the timescale over which we think it should be eliminated. You allow, of course, politicians to continue to tear strips off each other about how you balance tax and spending. But I think, particularly given the last few days, where in the Labour and the Conservative manifestos there's been absolutely no candour at all about this big problem, that might be something that all politicians should do together in any event. Gary.
Thank you very much. Gary Gibbon from Channel 4 News. Could you just clarify, on the 16 billion plus that it costs to raise the allowance to 10,000, what percentage of that big figure actually goes into the pockets of the 10% bottom earners in this country? And we were told yesterday by David Cameron, with a bit of help from the British people, even though the times are hard, he said we would get more for less from public spending. Are you saying, the elephant in the room, we get less for less?
On the first point, clearly, if you are someone who earns less than £10,000, then you don't get the full benefit of the raised allowance, right? So that's just stating the obvious. Anyone who earns £10,000 or more, up to 100,000, where we would just keep the tapering of the personal allowance exactly as it is under the government, would benefit, and would benefit to the tune of £700 each. I think it's a very simple, straightforward approach to putting money back in people's pockets. I mean, our approach is that we are going to have to be open with people, that government as a whole will have to, as a whole, spend less than it has before. You know, this is a net reduction in our plans of £10 billion in government spending. We're also saying, which is, of course, not what either the Conservatives or Labour is saying, is you can't take the difficult choices ahead, and some of them we think we're spelling out today. Clearly others will need to be taken in the future. Can be taken if you start this whole process by saying you're going to draw great big circles around Whitehall departments, so-called ring fencing. It's not honest either. I hear the Conservatives say they ring fence the NHS. They ain't. Because they're saying they want to save money on IT systems across government. They want to save money on a reduced public sector pay bill. They want to save money on public sector pensions. All of that is money which will, of course, be taken out of the NHS as much as from any other public service. So all we're saying is, yeah, here are our choices. You can see them. We've spelt them out. There will need to be further savings. We've indicated where some of the big long-term savings need to take place, particularly on public sector pensions and the Trident, not replacing the Trident nuclear missile system on a like-for-like basis. But don't start the process by kidding people that you can somehow fossilise certain parts of public spending. You can't.